basically finding different ways of sorting and organizing the items you have so you can actually sit back and look at them in groups. That can start telling you how you want to put together, well, a story. It might be the story of a whole family, or it might be that you find pieces within this about a small part of the family that you didn't know and you want to expand on. So I think what I'd actually like to do is take some questions and put some practical information into perspective for you. If anybody has a question ready. Larry? Can you unmute Larry?
I'm sorry. Thank you.
Oh, there you are.
I just questioned, this is probably the initial challenge that I've got. Everything from plaques on the wall from way back when to groups of documents like a scout document or a military discharge paper, mine or relatives. So you've got that's document type thing. And then beyond that, we go into artifacts, grandfather's knife, that kind of thing. I guess that's more like almost like the plaques too. So physical three-dimensional objects, how do you pull those all together and then start sorting them out by miniature groups or what? Okay,
so let's say you have, I don't know, 10 things. And they're sort of similar, but some are a metal, maybe there's a flag, a folded up flag, or whatever.
Right.
You're the one that has to make the decision on how they go together story-wise. Yep. Is it simply a group of items that belong to a person throughout their career? Or is it a group of items that represent, if this is all military, does it represent different members of the family that were in the military? So it's sort of like a common group. So if they all go together, the two vendors I put, one of them is a company called Talus, and they're in New York, and they make these boxes. And one of the things they do is they have a lot of, they can custom make them, but they have ones, I don't have any, I don't have things like that, but they have ones that will have compartments in them. And actually you could have a custom box made, because these are very heavy, pH neutral, lightweight, heavy as in tough. Paper is actually pretty tough. What you want to look for is archival storage boxes. The vendor is Talus, and their website is talusonline.com or something like that. The link is in the PDF file I put on my website.
Thank you.
And get on the phone with them. I mean, you can do an order online, but I would get on the phone with them, and because if you have things that are different thicknesses, it may not be obvious online without doing a whole lot of calculus or geometry on paper to figure out which box would accommodate the most of the selection of because you might see that they have some pre-made sizes, and this is where my practical advice comes in, because you can get really confused by how much variety is there and which thing to order for what purpose. Right. Get on the phone with the vendor, tell them kind of what you have, maybe sketch out on paper the height, width, and whatever dimensions of your items, and say, hey, I'd like to have this in 2 or 3 boxes or less. Can this be done? And maybe not. Maybe you need 4 boxes. Maybe you need 10. I mean, it just depends on what you are storing.
Okay.
But if it's the thing about artifacts and letters and such, they represent points in time that you're not going to get back. Right. So if it's important to keep not only clean and safe, but accessible. And the thing about these clamshell boxes is they're really accessible. They can be flat stored, or they can stand up depending on what you have in them. And they stay nice and tight and dry. They're not cheap, but they're not terribly expensive. And you really only have to do it once. Okay. It's not like you have to redo them every year, like, I don't know, the drapes or, changing
Sure.
the color in your living room.
Can I rephrase the question?
Sure.
If you give me that amount of information. Let's say that some of us have a spouse's side of the family artifacts and perhaps your own. Two completely different strings that ultimately have come together at one point. Talk to me about organization, just starting off. A whole
And
house.
are we talking about the same kind of three-dimensional items again?
Would include that as well as letters and, two-dimensional.
Okay. What I have behind me here is my very own library cart, because that's just the kind of gal I am. And it's all full of these century boxes, 3-ring binders with letters. What I did was I organized these letters chronologically and by sender and recipient. And the way they panned out is just how they panned out.
Oh,
Now, they're all packed, and I could probably still another half dozen of them because I have that many letters that my grandmother wrote. And that's really unusual, but it's to different people. So she had 6 children. One of the boxes has 2 children in it because for whatever reason, there weren't as many letters between those 2. So you're going to wind up with some enclosures that are not as full as others. And that's as unique as the life you are cataloging. It's just the way it's going to be.
and let me ask you this now. You're focusing on grandparents and whatnot. How about Ed?
Just focusing on letters.
Okay,
The fact that it's letters.
let's go back to the beginning. Ed's the other side of your family is Ed's, right?
Right.
Do you have different ones for Ed's?
I do.
Do you do split the very beginning? Say, this is my life.
I don't, well, the beginnings, wherever the beginnings is, I would take them by whose they were and what the chronology is. And basically that's how I kind of make my stack of what I was looking through. And then I calculate how many pieces of enclosure or whatever I need.
And do you physically say my husband's family is on this side of the room and mine is on that, just to keep things organized, or this shelf or the garage or whatever it is?
Well, a lot of my husband's stuff would be from before we were married. So it's not.
Yeah, exactly.
And also these boxes aren't that big. I mean, there's only so much blending you're going to do in one box.
Yeah.
I think that gets to where you might be overthinking it, only because since they're 3-ring binders and you'd have things in individual sleeves, if you find out you're wrong, you can just move them.
Got it. Okay. I don't want.
The main thing I think is keep things in chronological order and try to keep them in logical groupings. It's not always logical because people come and go and whatever, but let's say you wrote to one of your parents really frequently and you had 40 letters from over a 5-year period. Well, that would probably fill a box, and it would be logical to keep them together.
I think my confusion and hesitation of even starting this project, and this has been going on at 81 for at least 25 years, is that I haven't thought myself, okay, this side is going to be my history. This is going to be my wife's history. And people that the 2 of us knew, that'll be a third leg since. And does that make any sense at all?
It does. And that part of it is a personal decision. I would be inclined to have pre-marriage as a category, and then married life as a category, and then friends and family as a category.
Okay, that's cool. That answers all my.
And then it kind of depends on how much stuff you have in each group, and then you might have to break it up again.
And I don't know, because I haven't even started for fear of wasting time, having to reorganize it. So you just give me
It doesn't matter. Sometimes you have to reorganize.
Well, I'm a little bit nitpicky.
Well, it's okay.
That's good.
You might just get better, improve as you work on the project.
I'd like to step back and let other people be involved here, though. But thank you. That helped a lot. Thanks very much, Dorothea.
You're welcome, Larry.
You're the pro.
I do see we have a question. Would you ever recommend laminating letters or other
No,
paperwork?
no, I don't recommend laminating anything that has any permanence of any sort. I did have a client once who, she was real into our family history and archiving, and we did some really nice work together. But she came in one day and she said, I got to reframe this for my dad. And my dad shellacked everything. If it didn't move, it got shellacked. And seriously, he shellacked like a letter or something. It was a document of some sort. But no, and the reason is very simply that it's permanent. You can't reverse lamination in the sense of recouping that item. There are some things that get laminated that can be, but no, I would never laminate anything. I would never do anything permanent to an original. And that includes any kind of adhesive, dry mounting, anything like that.
Wow.
Only just because it's not reversible. And I also like letting paper be paper. If you laminate it, you never touch it again. So, any more? Next question.
That's all I'm seeing right now. Anyone has a question, feel free to raise your hand. Oh, Julia.
Did you unmute her?
Yep, I'm unmuted now. I just did it. If you have objects like diaries, some very old, like during the Civil War, that are family, would you recommend putting them in a kind of box?
Yes, again, so I have two vendors I recommend. There's other vendors out there, but these are the two I use all the time. The first one is Archival Products, and they have the best, well, the things they sell, they have the best of them, but they have the best binders that come in their own, that have slip cases to go with them. And they actually test these like thousands of times for bends, just so that they hold up. And so for binders and sleeves and basic boards like that, I always recommend them. And the other one is Talus. And truly, anytime you ask me about anything that's got any dimension, I'm going to say one of these archival storage boxes. And again, they can custom size them, but what I do, the ones I like that they sell, I always have these open because I have way too much stuff for the ones I have, but the bottoms have this really neat go in and out kind of thing. And it's the same material and they come in all different sizes. And what I like is these ones that are about 18 by 24, something like that, 16 by 20, because I can take a pile of letters and then I can also lay out like the corresponding time frame diaries. If it's not always for storage, sometimes it's for handling the whole management of the project. And it's also good for sorting. Like I understand that there are a few collections out there that are lots and lots of things that need to be arranged. Well, I've got about 10 or 20 of these. Well, certainly if I open the boxes I have, I've got tops and bottoms. And if I've got to really see what I'm dealing with, I just use this to lay things out. And then when, once I have them kind of sorted, then I can put them in proper configurations in the box. They really do last forever because it's not like you tote them around or take them out in the weather. They just go on the shelf. And again, they're not cheap, but they're not exorbitantly expensive. And they're so versatile. And if the sizes if they don't work for you, you can have them custom make boxes, or you can buy this material in sheets, and you could make like things that cut them to go together so that you could make like your own crisscross kind of,
Right. Yeah, thanks.
yeah. And
Put the
either
whole
of the
thing
two
in.
vendors will they'll sell you anything that you need for any kind of archiving project or bookbinding or anything.
It's great. It's great to know about them. Thank you.
Like Rosemary has a question. Just have you unmute yourself first.
How do I do that? Oh, I go down to the.
Oh, I think you
did
are
it.
unmuted now.
What if when you're going through your childhood mementos, you find things that you'd like to see often? Can you preserve them in a way that you can put them on the wall, for example?
Yes, almost anything can be framed. And I've been doing framing for about 35 years, something like that. And I actually framed a bottle of holy water. It was a sealed bottle of holy water put in a shadow box. And if it can be captured in some way, and almost anything can pretty straightforwardly be put in position in a shadow box without damaging the item. It can be captured in thread, or there's a number of ways things can be placed in a position. So yes, it can go in a shadow box, or a deeply matted frame of some other sort. Or there are also, it wouldn't be archival, but there are things like mounts for plates that, depending on what kind of item it is, if it's something that's like glass or wood and is not going to be damaged by dust or an occasional dusting, it doesn't have to go behind glass. I mean, there's archival, and then there's also living on planet Earth and doing things so that they get done and you can see them.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, for some reason, I seem to have a lot of knives. I was a wild child, I think, and I was just enjoying looking at them the other day, and I thought, oh, gee, it'd be kind of neat to have these somewhere where I could see them more often. You know, my 4th grade knife, my 7th grade knife.
It might be kind of funny to put it in a shadow box against like a metal, a magnet knife holder.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And maybe back it with some kind of an old-fashioned chalkboard.
Mm-hmm.
With those ruled line chalkboards that, I don't know, just, you put an idea in my head.
Yeah, they probably wouldn't even let me in school nowadays with the things I used to carry in my pockets. But
Doubt.
thank you, Dorothea.
Any more questions?
I see a question in the chat box. Are there any resources you recommend for restoration or repair of a toy animal?
The PDF I put on my website, I also put a resource for finding a conservator. Now there probably is someone who does, actually I would call like a custom seamstress, custom tailor, or someone who does needlework finishing. There are some needlework stores that have finishing that they do on site, and that actually sounds like a skill that they would be able to handle. It's not needlepoint in particular or a cross stitch, but items are made from needlework other than just framing them, or pillows. Pillows are finishing too. But there's a couple places that are within 30 or 50 miles of here that I bet have really good finishers. Well, I know that some of them have really good finishers, either on staff or they send out to. But in my PDF, there's the Association for Conservators have changed their name. It's in my document. It's out of Stanford University. It's the basically the National Association of Conservators, and they probably would have somebody that does basically soft sculpture repair. But I'd start local first, because I think that's something that I've done enough work on needlework and my own finishing project, but I think that someone who's really skilled at it would be able to do that and do it in an archival manner.
Dorothea?
Hi, Mary.
Hi. I've been trying to get on chat and stuff. Would you say it's fair to say, you know, since conservators, it's this what you're saying, which I thought was brilliant, that mean conservators are such a specialized science, it's so expensive, and sometimes you need a conservator, but sometimes you just need someone who knows how to handle the materials. And it's a matter of figuring out from a consumer viewpoint what your need is as compared to what it's going to cost. And you're doing an excellent job weighing that, because I would never have thought about that. If you find a really good seamstress, she can probably fix a teddy bear that
Right.
it to the level you would need it to be fixed. It's not as if you're putting something in the Smithsonian. And it's really a turn there between, as you said before, how you're going to use something and then what its life, what you expect its life to be.
Right. And some things we do in real life, we do correctly anyway.
Yeah.
They don't happen to be the super sophisticated things that you need someone who understands chemistry and all the other stuff. Yeah, there's often a way of handling something in a practical way.
Right. And I guess that's a good word. It's practical. You know, how are you, just like what you said with using the box for access too. It's a matter of deciding practicality versus, again, someone who got their PhD or getting very expensive masters in order to learn how to conserve a daguerreotype or a special teddy bear.
Right, right.
Great.
If I know the practical rules and follow them, then I can go and be carefree and creative in other ways.
Exactly. It's kind of like knowing what you're not doing, you know, knowing what it is that you're supposed to do, and then choosing as a good consumer and as someone who knows how they're going to use the materials to then go forth, knowing what you need to do. But that was smart about the stuffed animal. I wouldn't have thought that through. That was really smart.
I just thought of it as I was just thinking, what is that? What is that? Well, that's, yeah. But that it occurs to me to add here that in framing, many consumers think that if they bring something to a picture framer who does archival picture framing or whatever, conservation framing, that they're coming to a conservator, and they are not. The conservators are in a very specialized field. To be accredited, you have to have gone to an accredited program that is a 4-year long, really a postgraduate degree. I mean, I think you can go into them with an associate's degree, but technically it's a postgraduate degree.
And it's hard to get in. I mean, it's a hard program that, as you know, combines both science and art talents, so that it's really specialized. And to follow up, not to take up all the time, to follow up what you're saying too, because it's great that you're mentioning the companies, is that, you know, if you just go into Staples or even some of the scrapbook sellers, not all the scrapbook sellers, you know, just because they say it's archival, it doesn't mean that it is archival. You really, again, to be a good consumer and know what you're getting, because, you know, the stuff can be not inexpensive. So
I would say though that most places that have sleeves that are polypropylene and call them archival level or whatever, I don't worry about them too much on letters unless they're super old letters like pre-1900s that might have other chemistry in the ink.
yes.
There's weird chemistry in the ink. You get back 1900 back to 1800, and well, actually probably once you get earlier than 1850, 40, when it gets really old, it probably gets good again, because that's kind of what happened to paper.
Right. Yeah.
But if it's pre-1900, 1910, then I just use the ones from archival products, because I know they're going to be fine. But otherwise, if it's just a basic polypropylene sleeve and I've got more modern inks, I don't worry about them too much.
Yeah, and that's a good word to for people to be aware of, is polypropylene. Yeah. Right. So I know Russell has a question there, so I will now step back again. But good to see you on my little square.
Where's the question?
See, sorry. Oh, so we have a couple in the chat box. So the first one I'm seeing, I have a lot of old family silver. Any hints on displaying some of it without continual polishing? These are,
you know what? I think that the answer is no, because I think tarnishing has to do with oxidizing. I think. I'm not sure. I'm not a silver scholar, but I actually think that would be a really easy question to search online. because it's a real basic factual question about silver. But my guess is maybe the only way, was it display or just store it?
Display some of
To
it.
display.
Display. I think if it's exposed to oxygen, I think there's going to be some tarnishing. It might be really slow, like if it's behind glass, like in a maybe a shadow box frame with whether it's got a door lid or just glass in a frame. It's still going to be exposed to oxygen, and I think that's probably one of the culprits. But I'm not a silver scholar, so I don't know. But framing in a shadow box is probably the most practical way of displaying that, and, keeping the dust off and that sort of thing. Because that could be a real dust collector.
There's another question about displaying fabric items. Any ideas you have on that?
Okay, let's, it's a general question about fabric.
Yeah.
Well, I would only put them behind glass, plexi or otherwise. Plexi is real prone to static electricity, which is a dust catcher. But depending on the item, I might want to avoid any possibility of broken glass and shards getting into said fabric. But that being said, pretty typically you get something framed, it goes home safely and it goes on the wall and it's fine. Depending on what the item is, if it's a garment, there are ways of sort of soft hanging garments so that there aren't pressure points on them. Many things are mounted, sewn in a certain way. I'd actually have to see the item to see what I would do with it. Capturing things without putting extra holes in them or pressure points, because gravity will work on everything. If something is in a vertical hanging frame, no matter how carefully it's sewn in place or put in place or held in place, gravity will work on it. So whatever is holding it needs to not have extra weight at the hold points, extra pressure at the hold points. So that's a general statement about fabric.
I'm sorry, this was my question.
Uh-huh.
So I have a variety of different fabric items, one of which is a very old quilt.
Okay.
That I would like to display. I also have a variety of other smaller items that are currently just in archival paper, tissue paper, like on a shelf. So I'm just trying to decide what's the best way to handle for display, if I chose to do it that way, to have it sort of available so I could show it rather than having it wrapped up all the time.
If it's a quilt, is it the sort of thing that you would launder every so often, or is it an antique quilt you never want to have to wash? Or
It's an antique quilt.
okay, but I'm guessing that that's too big for you to consider to put behind glass. Okay, well, there are these nifty, there's a couple ways you could do that. Loops could be sewn on that could hold a bar to hang it, much like a curtain rod. And they can be done in the back, hidden. Also these really nifty clips that, this is the one thing about Zoom. I don't have like a little thing I can draw for you. I think they're called quilt clips. They are basically a curved piece of wood and a flat piece of wood with a screw through them, and they capture the quilt. And then there's a hole in the back that you can put over like a wall anchor or a molly bolt or whatever. And they're not terribly expensive. And what I'll do is when Becca, if you could put that on the list, my follow-up list from this thing, I'm going to update my PDF sometime in the next week or so, and I will add the link to the vendor that sells them, because I've got it in my gazillion Firefox bookmarks, because they're great.
Mhm.
I just can't remember exactly what they're called. They're not hard to search. It's something like quilt hanging clasps or something like that.
Mhm.
That might even be close enough if it's not right that
Okay.
it'll come up. But I'll put it, I will have it in that, if you saw my posting on the Facebook invitation, I have a PDF on my website that I
Okay.
wrote some notes to just get started for today. And then I'll update it with that as another vendor, because it's a nifty little invention. And,
Okay.
but other than that, I might put loops on the back or just sew a little panel on the back. Cause I mean, anybody who does quilt conservation will have their opinion about what to do with a quilt,
Right.
but I can't see that, well, the weight has to be carried somehow.
Right.
And I can't see that it's blasphemous to add more fabric to fabric. And
It's
if there's,
not, yeah. I was gonna say, it's not a valuable, collectible item. It was made by my great grandmother, probably 1890s or something, and passed down, and I have it, and it's
Right.
just sitting in a drawer. So I would like to do something with it. But she was a farm woman, so it's not fancy.
well, I would be inclined either to run a channel along the back or loops or something and put it on a hanger, a curtain rod kind of thing, a decorative curtain rod, or use these clips. Because the clips are nice because you can put them along the top and you can put a couple on the sides to kind of distribute the weight a little bit. But it's not really, if it had a financial value, collectible value, and something that was going to increase in value, I would take it to a conservator definitely to find out the best conservation, proper archival. But adding fabric is not technically going to hurt it. I mean, I haven't seen it. I don't know if there's places where it's threadbare and it needs something. But if your sewing skills are up for it, I would, I saw that. I would go ahead and give it a shot. But you could also, that's another thing, you could find a local seamstress, because that is something that
Okay.
There's a little finesse to sewing things so that it doesn't cause more stress. But yeah, that's the way I would approach it.
Okay. Thank you.
Larry, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Thank you. The question I had here, I wrote it out so as not to have to say it, but let me get to it here real quick. And that is, I'm looking at the things behind you in various boxes. You turn around and you look at those and you say, I know what that is exactly. And that relates to something the other side of the room, whatnot. If you were to ask me as a long distance cousin of yours to walk in there and to find anyone, to even know what you have in that room, you'd have to take a bunch of pictures and send them to me, unless you had done something like categorizing it in some type of a listing, which would be kind of interesting because other family members might also be interested in knowing what you have from Aunt Margaret's or whatever. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, like here, well, all of these are letters to or from my grandmother. So that's a gift. That's the common denominator. But then, okay, so now I have a book that's exclusively Mary, known as Maida, Isabel Dunlap Morgan, book 2. There's actually 2 books of her daughter, Mary, writing back and forth. So they all have labels.
But is that the only place in the universe that that wording exists? Do any of your family know that that book exists and what's in it?
As a function of time, not yet. They do know that I have my grandmother's letters to the tune of upwards of 4,000 or 5,000, and that she wrote back, and they know how much she wrote and who she wrote to, but they don't know that they know I've got them cataloged. They don't know that I have names on each book. But that's not a hard thing to do. As I actually Some of them I've already got in lists because the ones up here, they're actually printed because they're kind of finalized, and these are still a little bit in flux. So by being printed, it means they're in the computer. I can take that list and I can send it to whoever I want.
Which means literally you can send that computer file to you could send it to your whole family as if any of you are interested. You know, that's the kind of thing, because we have such an age difference now. And those kids that are, I don't know, 15 years old might be interested in one thing, and that is a heirloom quilt. You know, and if they knew, if someone was talking about that within their immediate family, bingo, they go back to us. I'm just trying to think how to get this word out so this stuff doesn't just get shuffled off and tossed, which is probably going to happen anyway if we're not careful.
You know, back to the topic, the overall topic of the summer of story. My suggestion, two suggestions. One, if you start a document on your computer that you can always type in an item. I don't mean every single letter, but like say a book you compile or a set of medals or just, you know, a grouping. And the other is, and this is why I use my story tree as one of the hooks for this talk. Pick a story that's interesting in your family and tell it. Take an anecdote from not necessarily your childhood, but maybe your parents' childhood, something that or their life together, or your grandparents' life together. The thing about story is that, and all of these artifacts that, I mean, there's the preserving of it, but then there's the story itself. The story happened in a point in time, and it's not going to happen again. And the telling of the telling of events, you know, it's not unlike the telephone game where people retell a story and tell a story and tell a story, but there's a gift in that. It's not just changing how things happen. There's a gift in that, and the change in the story is how it affects the storyteller. And as you are telling, and if you are telling your grandchildren a story about something that happened to your grandfather, you know, all the connections aren't made right away, but it does mean something that the person that you may or may not have met affected you, and you want to tell a younger person who certainly never met the ancestor about this thing that maybe changed the course of the family history. Maybe it's something that if things had gone differently, we wouldn't be here. I mean, those kind of things, they have an impact. And you don't have to see that impact today. It can happen 10 years from now when they're, you know, they turn a corner with a friend and realize, oh, that could have been me. I mean, that's how stories work. We tell them, we let them go and do their work.
And when you tell this story, do you incorporate, here's a typical letter as a?
Actually, when I'm telling a story, I might say, I learned this from a letter or whatever, or afterwards I might say, and you know, it was written about in person by my grandmother, and here is the letter.
That's great. Yeah, I like that.
So yeah, it doesn't have to be, the big job is what you're having fun with. The story is what somebody else is going to have fun with.
Well, going back for a second, I think it was, I can't recall who it was Anne-Marie, I think it was, Rosemary, where the idea of the knives, how cool that is, a story in which if that were me, I'd be trying to think and this particular knife is the first one, and here's how. And I had my share when I was a child, they're all gone, but I remember where I bought a certain one, and to be able to take a picture of those collection, even if they're just laying on a bed, not to mention shadow boxed. Boy, that would be fascinating. That would be really interesting to all kids, especially the boys.
Well, and also if you're telling a story of how you got something or did something or made something or how things used to be done, it doesn't mean we all have to go out and learn survival skills, but I think it's really important to connect kids to why there were survival skills and why certain things got made and why all kids needed to know how to use a knife or whatever. And it's not to know how to use one just because it's a tool. And, you know, we are supposed to be the mammal that uses tools.
There was a time when I could carve a penny whistle. I mean, those days are long gone, but it was entertainment because Twitter was good.
So any more questions?
It looks like Michael has a question. So Michael, I'm just gonna unmute you.
More of a comment than a question. I've known Dorothea for a very long time, probably over 20 years now. She's a colleague, and she's also been wonderful in framing many of my family's stuff and also conserving it digitally. And she just finished a project for me, which was digitizing 3 years of letters from my father to my mother during World War II.
Wow.
And with those digital files, I put them on Netscape and made the link available to all my family members.
Oh,
That's great.
So they have access to that, as well as the digitized photos
wow.
of the family from that time. And these are albums that Dorothea digitized from the 20s and early teens. Very old photographs, ancient relatives. But it's fabulous to have that available to the family. And since I'm a family archivist, it was a great opportunity. And I thank Dorothea very much for doing it.
Thank you, Michael.
Yeah.
It was fun. It was a fun project.
It was a great project.
So are there any other questions?
See anything in the chat box right now, and I don't see any hands.
Okay, I'll ask one more. It's not to, I'm really fascinated with what Michael said about the Netscape. I have no idea what that's all about.
I'm sorry. Whoa. Can you, yeah, sorry. I always, Netscape is a search engine from ancient times, from a long time ago. And I get it confused with, for some reason, with Dropbox. So all this stuff, all these things are in Dropbox.
I can do that.
So, yeah. Thank you for
One
asking the
question
question.
in chat.
Thank you.
So any other questions?
There's one in the chat about recording a survey of what you have.
Oh, that's Mary, that's your comment, Mannix.
I was just interjecting to go on with what Dorothea was saying with her discussion with Larry, that, it's as she says, but she has the wonderful concept of telling the story, but to really, as he's saying, to do just the real basic record survey of what you have, as Dorothea was saying, set up a spreadsheet, whatever, just put letters, 75 years, just so that you know what you have, and then you can share that with other family members. It's a real basic kind of archival approach.
Karen, did you have a question? Yeah, okay. Oops, sorry.
She's muted.
I'm so sorry. Okay, I think you're unmuted now.
Yeah. So Mary Mannix will appreciate this, but so years ago, I was the mayor of a city, and I was very interested in getting a lot of the old documents that cities have, municipalities have in their files, and getting it digitized. I don't know if you work, Dorothea, with municipalities at all, or is, and I don't know where it's gone, Mary, since I wasn't elected 4 years ago. So I don't know if anything more has happened with that, but it's a really amazing amount of history that these cities have, that municipalities still have. And it would be great to digitize it. I just think the amount for something like Ancestry, you know, for a database to tie people back to that would be phenomenal.
Karen, I think Crawley did some digitization for them. And of course, in municipalities, you have the legal connections to the state archives and what municipalities, you know, can legally do to their records, which in theory would one day go to the state archives.
Right, right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah,
But I
it's
think Crawley did do some work for them.
good, good, good.
But
Cool.
don't quote.
I won't. I won't. That's all right. I'm interested in this because we're going to be retiring. My husband's retiring in a year and a half. And we're moving to Pennsylvania, and I'm going to have lots of time on my hands. So I really want to get. I've started talking to my 96-year-old dad about some things, and so anyway. So I love genealogy, and I'm really looking forward to being able to spend more time on this for my own family.
That's great. Well, Becca I put my contact information in the chat area, and it's also on the document the PDF document that's downloadable. You know, if there's any help you need or you want to contact me, I can be found.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
And we're Facebook friends too, I think.
Okay, Michael, looks like you have a question.
Yet another comment regarding the trip to Pennsylvania and the 96-year-old relative. Some time ago, when my uncle was 80, he just died at 104. I told him to. He had a lot of stories. He had a long history. As a colonel in the Army, World War II, Korea, Vietnam. And I said, Uncle Tom, it'd be nice if we knew your story, your history and stuff. So I said, what you should do is just get a cassette player and a microphone and start talking. And he did. And he made 8 cassettes front and back of his life. And again, that's something that, well, my brother digitized it, and that is something else that's available on Dropbox for the family. So
Great.
my point was just to start talking and ask the question, where did you grow up? When you were born, what was it like, and things like that. I did the same thing with my mother. And also that was digitized by my brother, and that is also part of the Dropbox family file. So it's like an oral interview.
Yeah, thank you. I have recorded some of his stories, but I should get a whole lot more of them. But yeah, thank you.
And transcribe them, Karen. Get them transcribed.
Yeah.
Can I contribute to that?
Good point.
The Veterans History Project of the Library of Congress is phenomenal. And you need to know more about that. Are you familiar with that, Karen?
I am somewhat, but I have not pulled that in for him. And he was in the Navy, so he does have, he was a pilot in the Navy, so.
And don't forget, Karen, we're a repository, and we'll take him even if he's in Hawaii.
Okay.
And he's still living, is that right?
He is still living.
This is a wonderful program. It was about 20 years ago, Congress gave Library of Congress about $2 million. They hooked up with the Microsoft at that time. And I've interviewed I've interviewed 2 servicemen myself. I've been interviewed also by a Navy chaplain. And the thing is, they just ask you if you're willing to talk. Some of these folks are not willing to talk about it, but others will just say, tell us about your first day in the service or your last. And they'll sit there and soon they start relaxing. And within 30, 40 minutes, one fellow sat in my living room and started crying because he was describing surviving the Battle of the Bulge.
Mm-hmm.
His family knew nothing about that. At the funeral, I happened to mention it to one of his nephews, and he said he never would talk about it. I said, well, I've got a copy of the talk, and it's in the Library of Congress. It's available as part of the records of the people of the United States. And I made some copies of this and dispersed it to the family. That's the kind of thing that we're losing every day, not just World War II, but literally Afghanistan and Kuwait. So that's a tremendous program. And there are a number of people in every community that volunteer their time to do that. And I really recommend you to do it, because what a shame to, of those 8 hours of tapes, how cool it would be to say, give us some of your highlights. And he would have said, of all of that, here's what I remember the most. Fascinating moments.
That's fantastic. I'll do that. I'll do that. Thank you.
Just a point of interest, if I may. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. A few years ago was my mother's 80th birthday party, and she had been the interpreter for President Sukarno of Indonesia back in the late 50s and early 60s. And so I had a number of newspaper clippings. You can imagine from that time, they were kind of a little faded and what have you, but there were newspaper clippings and pictures that had been taken by photographers at that time with her, with President Sukarno, and she, as the interpreter, she went to the Latin countries, so Mexico, Colombia, Argentina, and interestingly enough, Cuba. So she sat at the table with Fidel Castro and his brother and other people, and was the interpreter between these people. So she had kind of an inside view of what was going on with them. So for her 80th birthday, my wife had a party for her, and I took these clippings along with a whole bunch of pictures, and had them, as Dorothea mentioned, had them professionally digitized and put onto a DVD with some music in the background to, make it interesting. And so when we had her party at our home, I had that playing on a big computer screen. It was sort of just looping, through that at a very slow pace so people could stop and look at this stuff. So I found a useful way to not just put them in an album, but to digitize them and share them with the family. And I made 8 of those DVDs, which I shared with, different members of the family so they could have a record of that as well. So just something of interest to consider.
And when it comes to digitizing, I would be not doing my full duty if I didn't put in a plug for the Frederick County Public Library's Memory Lab. Our buildings are closed right now, but when we are open again, that's a service that's available to you if you have images that you need to scan or old VHS cassettes that you would like to digitize. It is a free service to use. So if you go to fcpl.org/memory lab, you can find out more about that.
Oh yeah, I didn't know about that, Becca. That's it's probably cheaper than because I spent, it was pretty expensive to get that stuff done, but to me it was worth it. But I didn't realize the library had similar services. Thank you.
Yeah, it's that trade-off of time versus money, because we do let you do it yourself, which means pretty big time investment.
Yeah, well, that's okay. I mean, anyway, thank you.
Can you guys do the reel-to-reel, the old?
We can't. No, we don't currently have equipment to do that.
So I have one other question for Dorothea, if I may.
Sure.
I have an old 33 album that is music from my great uncle, my mother's uncle, who was a composer. And there was a famous pianist who did an entire album of just his music. So I took his I took the album to one of those, you brought it to mind, Becca, when you mentioned the recording, that 33, and had them put onto CDs, and again, distributed them to some of the family. And, but my problem is, how do I take care of this 33? I had the jacket, but the jacket's kind of beat up. You can imagine this thing was done in the 50s. So it's, any notions about how to sort of
Well,
keep that in
Joe,
the jacket and so on?
you're just talking about archival storage, correct?
Yes. Mhm.
So I would, on the PDF that I made, did you see the link to my website for the PDF?
I did. I saw a number of links down there.
Okay, if you go to my website, on my homepage, I put a free download of PDF I wrote of some information. And one piece of information are 2 vendors of archival materials. One is Archival Products, and I would start with them. Go to their website, get their phone number, and call them. And on the website, you'll be able to see different kinds of enclosures. They have different items, and one's probably for albums. And again, it's going to be a variation on the just paper archival enclosure, but sized for an album, or they also have them sized for newspapers. And you can call them and see if they have one that's literally for a phonograph record, or if there's one that's a close size. And it will wind up being some kind of shallow version of what I just showed you, and maybe clamshell, maybe not. I don't know. It'll enclose the whole thing, and you can store it on a shelf, and it'll stay dry, and it's probably all you need.
Okay. Just 2 days ago, I received an email from a cousin of mine in St. Louis, who was the recipient of all the family documents going back to the early 1800s. Mostly military records of our ancestors who were officers in the military. So, but they're the original paper copies that he has. And so your notion about the polypropylene, covers. Now, these are like legal size. They didn't do 8.5 by 11 back then. They're legal size, pretty long. And so I'm assuming they make the polypropylene sleeves that are, big enough to do that.
Right. I always start with Archival Products because I like their products better. But if they don't have it, and they don't have a huge selection, then I would go to the other vendor I recommended, which is Talus. And the web address is in there. And if you download the PDF, it's a hot link. It'll just take you to the website. Talus has all different sizes of such things. And them you definitely have to get on the phone with and kind of drill down to from their variety what you want. But they can help you.
Okay.
I have some that are legal size, and what I don't have is a box that's literally legal size. I've got oversized boxes, but they also have them for binders, and I haven't gotten any of the right size binders, but yeah, Talus has just about anything you could want.
Cool. Okay, well, that's good to know, because he's going to send it to me in the near future, because he said no one else in the family was interested. His children weren't, so I'm the family genealogist. So he's asked me if I would, sort of take custody, of that. And of course, I would love to. And so I want to make sure I do this right, where I can, maintain the integrity of the documents for, for a good period of time.
Right. Well, Talus will have the supplies that you need. And I don't sell supplies. I do archiving, I do restoration work and scanning. And I will do, well, that's germane to this topic. But most of those places don't wholesale. So I don't resell any supplies. So go straight to the horse's mouth.
Okay, thanks.
So any more?
Okay, I'll throw one more in, and that is resources. I've heard a variety of things, the need for shadow boxing, the need for fine.
Larry, I do that. I'm a framer.
Oh, okay, well, there you go. But even other information like what what I threw out was the Library of Congress project. Even the idea of how to do the Dropbox with the range of photos. That's fascinating. There are a bunch of ideas here that I'm going to take some, hopefully, fairly simple process to get through and too. I guess I'll ask the pros here, those of you that have done it a lot or this is your world. How do we keep track of all of this? Not keep track, but how do we pinpoint in on the few things that we're particularly interested in? Transcribing sound, commercial services.
Larry, are you saying we need to have another program?
That's what I'm thinking. Now, the interesting thing is, one of the reasons I'm saying this is that Sam's Club's knocked off all of their photo conversion. So they turned over that market to private firms and to Walmart. So Walmart is the only one in town other than perhaps Carpel that seems to do that. But if you know of, besides those two, anybody else, I'm real interested in that because that has an effect on how expensive something is, because now you can gauge whether or not the proposal that they're giving you, a price proposal, is reasonable.
Well, are you talking about photographs or audio or all of it, or what?
Yes, that's what it comes down to. We all have these diverse things.
Right.
From a knife collection, I've got my officer's sword. What do I do? Do I display that on a wall, or all the way down to who knows what?
Well, I can help you with that. I mean, that's the kind of project that I would address.
Yeah. Okay. So I'd send you an email and say, hey, what can you do?
Well, and we'll have a Zoom or some socially distanced conversation.
Okay. Well, you've helped me. You've helped me with a lot. It's been a couple of years now since, but you've really done a lot of good transcribing of material for me, and I appreciate that.
That's great. Yeah, digitizing anything as far as like works on paper, photographs, particularly photographs and slides. That's all the kind of high resolution scanning and for archival purposes that I do. And anything having to do with any sort of framing display I can handle. When it comes to audio and other things like that, I don't have the equipment and software to transcribe tape or any of that sort of thing. But when you get to places like Walmart, you will run into some speed bumps on scanning photographs in particular because of copyright issues. So I can actually work with you on those issues. Walmart, at some point, Walmart will probably tell you, no, we won't do.
Right.
They have a line they don't cross, and I'm not really sure what it is, but
No.
but there are, but with good reason, because as a big corporation, they've got to have some simplification of rules and boundaries.
Just back real quick. A Navy group I'm a member of sent me this book and to encourage me to write a story about a certain part of my military experience. And I'm now in the process of reading this. This is called "You Can Write Your Family History" by Carmack. Paperback from www.genealogical.com, whoever they are. The idea of taking these hard items and attaching text and thoughts and memories to them really, I think, is enriching. I think it's terrific. It's the one way you can get through to a younger generation, I think, especially if you put some hip hop music to it. Wrong. I wouldn't even know what to select. But I'm interested in writing these stories. And the fun thing, what I've heard today, I've heard about knives, about a relative who's got incredible stories, the music, just on and on. It's amazing. Every one of us seems to have. It'd be fun if in about 6 months we can come back together and each of us could talk about what we gained from this and what we produced, perhaps. I thought.
Larry, you brought to mind as you were mentioning that one other question that came to my mind. I too have some hard, things. I have a sword, from a family thing and some other items of that sort. And I've often wanted to kind of put them on display,
Right.
Not necessarily in the living room, but somewhere in the house. And, but I wanted to put some sort of little plaque or little story statement or something under them to explain, okay, what is this thing? That's instead of just a piece of decoration, this is actually a family history thing.
Absolutely.
And I thought about it. Do I do a brass, thing that's durable, or do I type something up and put it behind a piece of glass or plexiglass? Any thoughts on that, Dorothea, on, hanging something on the wall and then having something reasonably decorative that's, not too ugly, that can sort of give a little story about that item?
Any of those options are a perfectly functional, perfectly good way to do this. What you now cross the line into the decor of your home and your personal taste. So you're talking about a sword, right? That's your example for this question.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So you have the sword and a decision on how to display that. So is it going to simply be on hooks mounted on the wall, or like captures mounted on the wall and laid that way on the wall? At which point maybe a simple brass plaque is appropriate. I mean, maybe just because it will kind of look like it'll look like a military presentation. It's the feel of the story as well. It could be something that is typeset and printed and framed. Then the sky's the limit. I mean, if I do something like that for a client, then I can typeset it however I wish. I could put a little image in the document as well. There might be a little image, a small photograph of the person, or there might be a photograph or a replica of a coat of arms, or some other military insignia. So it kind of looks like not a letterhead, but it looks like it doesn't just have to be a paragraph of text. It could have a little flourish to it as well. Because if it's in the computer and then printed, I'm not really limited by anything. I also have an archival printer, so I can do a pretty sophisticated print job replicating photographs or anything. It really just depends on what the look is going to be. And so if you were going to put it in a shadow box, I might recommend a frame that then has a companion frame that's similar but small and suitable for like an 8x10, just some kind of typeset thing underneath of it. It might also be a shadow box where a plaque could sit inside the shadow box under the sword, mounted at the back mounting on the backing board, same as the sword is. So there's all inside one case. It really just depends on personal preference and then what is available already manufactured for the purpose. Yeah, at this point, it would kind of have to be personal preference, but those are some ideas.
Okay.
Can I add to that?
Sure.
This is one of the most fascinating things. If you've written a story about that sword, or enough information to really create a little bit of a strand, it's difficult to get that on a plaque. And I'm now moving the other direction. I'm saying I'll almost rather have a flash drive hanging on that they can transfer into their iPhone and read, or even a QR code, which you can get a ton of information onto a QR. You can get your whole story into a QR code. And increasingly, those are the type of things that anybody walking up to it is going to say, hey, what do I do? Just take your phone out, read QR code, and they'll tell you all about this sword. The handle was shark skin. It was navy. Feel it. I mean, just goes on and on.
That is a great idea. Geez, that never occurred to me that you could use that with I don't know how to do that, but it sounds like a great idea.
Could we ask Mary or Becca, how do we learn about QR codes for this?
Be in touch. Contact the Maryland room. I can hook you up, Joe.
Seriously? Oh.
We're like,
okay.
We can hook you up with anything.
Dynamite.
All right. Because I got all sorts of things. I've got I've got little medals, you know, that people have gotten. I've got, you know, things, big coin things that have been given, and, you know, stuff like that. And just sticking them out there doesn't really say much. You know, there is a story behind them. And so that would be kind of nice to share that.
Yeah, I mean, don't forget, even if we don't know, we're librarians, we can find it. You know how to track me down, Joe. And I also wanted to say that the book Larry mentioned, you can write your family history. There is a circulating copy for that as well. And also, and then I'll let you know back to the background, but don't forget that the Maryland Room is an official collecting repository of the Frederick County Veterans History Project, and we will take people who aren't just Frederick County. So
cool. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, that was neat, Larry. You have things pinned to a fabric of some sort?
Yeah, for 50 years that we've been married, as we've traveled, we picked up a pin of some type, whether we were skiing or whether we were in Paris, the Eiffel Tower, and this becomes kind of a history of travel.
Right.
And to my great surprise, my oldest granddaughter the other day walked in, she said, "Grandpa, one day you're going to be gone. I want that." I said, "Holy mackerel." That's the first one that ever said that.
It's a story, and you never know when it's going to hit somebody.
I never know when I'm going to be gone.
So Joe, with your artifacts there, there's also the possibility of gathering 4 or 5 things and putting them in just a small shadow box. Mm-hmm. Something where it's a little grouping that goes together. There's no rule except once you've decided you want to do something, kind of deciding proportion and scale of what that project is going to be.
Yeah.
And if it's going to ultimately be a piece in a larger puzzle, there's no reason why, you know, a few medals that go together and a plaque or something can't fit in just a small shadow box. Is going to become part of another grouping elsewhere.
Mm. Yeah, I have, as the family genealogist, I have in the garage, I have literally, you know, one of those big shelves filled with file folders, you know, with all sorts of stuff in there. And then in my little workroom here, you know, I have, you know, stuff like I showed you, medals and swords and what have you, just sitting up on a shelf, you know, and, you know, at some point I'd like to organize that in such a way that it's a family story, you know. So I did publish 2 books on the family, self-published 2 books through Lulu, 2-volume publication on my mother's family. And so that's one record, you know, that I have. The others is, as we're all talking about, is the hard items, you know, the 33 albums, the sword, the you know, the little medals that we have for one thing or the other, you know, that sort of stuff, and organized in such a way that those of our family and descendants who are interested and whose lives this will fill with meaning and purpose, we are setting the stage for that. And I think that's probably what we all want to do in one way or another.
Joe, I've done a shadow box with military items in it and got some help from a professional framer also in town several years back. That really it seems to be of more interest on my wall than many of the pictures to my family. That's fascinating. It opens up a lot of conversations. If I could help you on that, boy, I sure love to do it.
Okay, thanks, Larry. I appreciate that.
How do we stay in touch? Is it legal to talk to each other this way? Here, Joe. Can you see this, Joe? 301-275-4042.
You can put it in the chat area.
Yeah, put it in the chat area.
Thank you.
You can send a message directly to Joe.
I'm also interested in the knives and also in the quilt. So in the military.
So let me say a couple of things about organizing a ginormous project. I have a similar array of boxes of family memorabilia, genealogy, artifacts that I've been triaging over the years. And, you know, hence I've got my collection of letters thus far. And it can be overwhelming if you think of it in terms of, I need to have a plan. But if you think of it in terms of, I'd like to have a goal. And there's this thing that's really interesting to me. If the goal is to make things accessible to people, I would say stay flexible to opportunities. One opportunity is state archives, because most states, Maryland certainly, will take a collection of a resident of the state. So there is a place where things will not get thrown in the dumpster if things really get down to the wire and there's no family member that can take a collection of letters, photographs, whatever. It's my understanding that a state archive is always going to want the most complete collection possible, because that's what's interesting. If you find something in one letter, you might find something in a diary or in a photograph or something that pulls more stuff together. Right. So there's that. There's starting a catalog of what you have as you do projects. We've talked about making a document that makes sense to you on your hard drive, whether it's a little mini table in a word processing document or whatever, where you can put titles or you can sort them or whatever, titles of your albums, titles of how you've sorted categories of things. And then and you can build on that as you can. You don't have to engulf the whole collection in a plan, or it's not all or nothing. But what I would suggest for helping make the decisions on the path is find a story that's really meaningful to you, and start and flesh out that story in the sense of whether or not you write it down, pull together all the artifacts that have to do with that story or that year of that person's life that story is about, and start organizing things from there. Getting a starting point to how you're going to either do things alphanumerically, chronologically, whatever. You can start with one important story to you as an anchor. It's not like the stuff's going anywhere. You can, if the blocks of things you do are in some kind of alphanumeric chronological order or other logical grouping order, the groups can be moved around later by someone else, but they've already got a little tone and form and structure to whatever they are. I mean, if you already have a box of files, I might suggest just looking and seeing, okay, is it worth it for me to get really good heavy duty file folders and just putting them in something that holds them a little better, so when we pull them out, we can read them a little better. They might already be in order, but they just might need, maybe the old manila folders are getting ratty or whatever, and it's time to do a little bit of a sort, and it's a couple-hour job instead of a couple-week or a couple-month job. To just put things in a little more accessible, maybe rewrite some labels. The whole job does not have to be done by one person in one decade or whatever amount of time someone has. Starting with something that starting with a story that you flesh out gives the next person an anchor to start from in terms of what they're interested in terms of the inspiration. And a little inspiration goes a long way to all the hours of practical organization. A little inspiration gives people a lot of energy for that endless work. Because if you hook them with a story, then they're going to be like, like a wild pig looking for a truffle. It's like, oh my God, what else could be in these boxes? And they're not even going to, once they've got the bug, they're not going to worry about it. So do what's important to you, and let it shine. It doesn't have to be the bulk of the project or even the bulk of the plan. And buy archival boxes.
Dorothea, can I interject again for a sec?
Absolutely.
Okay, I just as for my own kind of PR, I have a whole handout that I created, I don't know, 20 years ago called Thinking About Your Stuff, which you may have seen at some point in time. I may have given it to you. And it talks a lot about what people to think about what's going to happen when you die, essentially, because there are fine institutions besides your state archives. And it does give you an idea of the sorts of things you should think about if there's certain things want to go to repository because you don't have any family members who want them, or you have too many family members who want them. So if anyone desires such a thing, feel free to email the Maryland Room or call the Maryland Room or touch base or whatever. But and again, let me say one more time, I love your story concept. I'm going to steal that for future presentations.
Don't steal it. Tell a story about it.
Tell a story about it. I will. How I stole it. How I stole it.
Yeah.
Can I jump in with something?
Sure.
Okay, so my grandfather, so Dorothea, that's fantastic. It's so good to hear that kind of advice because it is overwhelming for somebody that's kind of just getting started in it. My grandfather wrote Family Story. I mean, he wrote this, paper that tracks us back to the Mayflower. And he has little stories in there, but you're right. There's like certain ones that would be like, wow, I'd like to jump on this one and find out more. And then Joe, you had said something great, which is some people, some of our descendants may not have, like nobody in my family really cares about this stuff except I have a passion for it. And so it just, one of our descendants I know will really appreciate the work that's done now in our lives, with whatever stories we can pull together, however much we can do. But it's like, Dorothea said, it's like jump in now and you add story and then somebody else will want to find out and add more to it. So thank you so much.
And Karen, you never know who's going to come looking. I have researched people that are not anywhere at all related to me. We never know who's going to come looking for us. Even me as a barren spinster, I don't know 50 years from now who's going to come looking for me for a wide variety of reasons. So, we think we're just a drop in the ocean, but you never know who's going to come looking for you.
Yeah. And Ancestry has brought that. I don't know how you guys feel about Ancestry, but it's brought that out a lot more as far as who's your third cut, all these different people related to you. And when I was at my dad's house this last time, I took pictures of like everything he had, all these photographs, and I started feeding it into the Ancestry stuff. And of course, for every link you put in there, boom, you get 1 million of them. So I haven't gotten back to that yet, but yeah, you're right, Mary. It doesn't, people, whoever will be looking for this stuff. It's fantastic. So I have the bug.
So I'm going to throw in something else about story and our time right now. Regardless of what the topic is, we're in a time where there are huge numbers of people in a couple of groups or subgroups who are they're not talking to each other, and they're not seeing around the next corner what's coming. And there's a great deal of uncertainty. And the fact of the matter is, the people that came before us went through these times of whatever sort, whether they're literally parallel, pandemic, whatever, or they're just other times of crisis where a vast majority of people did not see where the next hope was coming around the corner.
That's right.
Or didn't see the tools yet to troubleshoot whatever the problem was going on, win a war, do whatever. And the time people took to just simply to write letters, the time people took to communicate with each other, the time they took to solve these problems, even, there's a reason why we talk about certain people who saw hopelessness, but yet found some kind of a solution, whatever it was. Stories of success or just getting through a time like this are so needed now. I mean, or just stories of real life to remind people of what real life is about. Normal life, average life, mundane life. And as far as crises go, we're not even in like the crisis as it would have been 100 years ago. I mean, we have the ability to contact the store for food or whatever. We're having a crisis of inconvenience in a lot of ways. And there's many people are having a more difficult time than that. But the bulk of people who are talking and not communicating really are really having a crisis of inconvenience, which probably is actually rooted a lot in fears. fear of the unknown. So they complain about their inconveniences, but they're actually pretty scared about what they don't know what's coming. And stories help ground us in being calm, having a thoughtful resolution. Reading a story about a thoughtful resolution to some problem is actually really needed now. And so stories about the successes of our ancestors or any of it, there's so much benefit in it.
Amen.
Ed has arrived. Hi, honey.
I have to leave you guys because it's getting to be ice cream hour, so my staff needs some help here. But can we do this again?
Oh, that's right, the creamery. I was.
Yeah. So sign us up, please, please, please. Thank you to everybody on here, guys. I missed the library.
Coming. Thanks for participating.
Yes, and all you guys. But
Take care, Karen.
all right, thanks. Be well, you guys. Stay safe.
Thank you, Karen, Pennsylvania.
Thank everyone for coming. So I'm happy to keep this open if you want to continue to take questions. But I'm going to go ahead and end our live stream and just say again, thank you for coming. You can find more virtual programs like this if you go to fcpl.org. You can also find us on Facebook at Frederick County Public Libraries. You can find us on YouTube. We are Fredco Library there.
Okay.
Becca, can we mention